Success has a strange way of hiding behind someone else's name. For 7 years, Amara Nwosu helped build one of the city's most respected accounting firms. At just 31 years old, she had earned a reputation for honesty, precision, and discipline. Clients trusted her work, colleagues relied on her expertise, and even senior executives admitted she was one of the brightest accountants they had ever worked with. Yet outside the office, almost nobody knew who she was. Every major proposal passed through Amara's hands before reaching the client's desk. She spent late nights reviewing financial reports, correcting mistakes, and creating strategies that saved companies millions. But when the deals were signed and the praise came pouring in, it was always her managing director standing in front of the cameras, accepting congratulations for work she had done. The unfairness frustrated her, but it never changed the way she worked. Amara believed excellence was an act of worship. She refused to cut corners, manipulate figures, or chase recognition. She worked with the quiet confidence that, sooner or later, God would honor her faithfulness. There was another reason she endured the long hours. For years, Amara had dreamed of opening her own accounting firm, not to become rich or famous, but to build a business founded on integrity. She wanted honest entrepreneurs to have somewhere they could turn without being exploited by dishonest consultants or pressured into unethical decisions. Every spare evening was spent preparing for that dream. She attended business seminars, studied new financial regulations, refined her business plan, and saved as much money as she could. While others spent weekends relaxing, Amara spent hers preparing for a future she believed God had placed in her heart. The people closest to her believed in that dream just as much as she did. Friends often told her she was wasting her talent working for someone else. Even a few clients quietly admitted they would gladly follow her if she ever started her own firm. Every compliment strengthened her belief that her season was finally approaching. Then one afternoon, after another successful presentation, her managing director called her into his office. He leaned back in his chair, smiled, and said, "I've never told you this before, Amara, but you're the best accountant this company has." Amara thanked him politely. He continued, "One day you're going to do great things." She left his office encouraged, believing that perhaps the promotion she had worked toward for 7 years had finally arrived. Instead, the promotion went to someone else. It wasn't the first time. And somehow, that hurt even more. That evening, Amara didn't complain. She simply went home, opened her Bible, and prayed as she always did. She thanked God for another day. She thanked Him for the job she still had. And she asked for one thing she had been praying about for years. "Lord, when it's your time, show me the next step." She had no idea that the answer to that prayer would come sooner than she expected, and that it would change the course of her life forever. The following Sunday, Amara attended the annual revival service at New Haven Assembly. It was one of the biggest gatherings of the year. The church was overflowing with worshipers. Families filled every seat, while latecomers stood along the walls listening attentively. For Amara, it wasn't just another Sunday. She arrived carrying years of unanswered prayers and the quiet hope that God was finally about to move. When worship ended, Pastor Elias stepped onto the altar and began preaching about God's timing. He spoke about Abraham waiting for Isaac, Joseph waiting for the palace, and even David waiting for the throne. Each story carried the same message: God never arrives late. He paused, closed his Bible, and looked across the congregation. "The greatest mistake many believers make," he said, "is not walking through the wrong door." He paused again. "It's forcing open the right door before God opens it." The church fell silent. Without another word, Pastor Elias stepped down from the altar and slowly walked through the congregation. No one knew where he was going. Then he stopped, right in front of Amara. She looked up, surprised. The elderly pastor smiled gently before speaking. "My daughter, the next door that comes before you will change your life." Hope immediately filled her heart. Then his expression grew serious. but do not open it yourself. Wait for the Lord to open it, no matter how convincing it looks, no matter who brings it, and no matter how long it takes. Just wait. Pastor Elias gently placed his hand on her shoulder, prayed quietly for a few seconds, then returned to the altar and continued his sermon as though nothing unusual had happened. The service ended, but Amara couldn't stop thinking about those words. What door? What opportunity? Why would God warn her before it even appeared? For the next several weeks, she prayed constantly, asking God for clarity. Instead of confusion, she found peace. Not peace that everything would be easy. Peace that it was finally time to take the step she had delayed for years. After 7 years of preparing, planning, and saving, Amara walked into her managing director's office carrying a resignation letter. He stared at it in disbelief. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. She nodded. "I believe this is the next season of my life." He tried to convince her to stay, reminding her of the security she was walking away from. But Amara had already made her decision. A month later, she walked out of the company carrying a small cardboard box containing 7 years of memories. She wasn't afraid. She believed she was walking toward the future God had prepared for her. She had no idea that the greatest test of her faith was only just beginning. Starting Nwosu, financial consulting felt like the beginning of a new chapter. Amara rented a small office, printed business cards, launched a simple website, and contacted everyone she had met throughout her 7-year career. Former clients congratulated her. Friends celebrated her courage. Even her family believed it wouldn't be long before her phone was ringing with new business. At first, Amara believed the same. She arrived at the office before sunrise every morning and left long after sunset. She spent her days meeting potential clients, preparing financial proposals, and attending networking events. Every rejection only convinced her that the next opportunity was around the corner. Then, reality began to set in. A manufacturing company praised her proposal, but awarded the contract to a larger firm. A bank rejected her application for a business expansion loan because her company was too new. An investor who had promised to finance her business suddenly stopped answering her calls. A client scheduled 3 meetings only to cancel each one at the last minute before eventually hiring another accountant. Months passed. The office remained quiet. The phone rang less often than she expected. Some days, the only person who walked through the door was the courier delivering utility bills. Still, Amara refused to lose hope. Every morning she unlocked the office believing today would be different. Every evening she locked it, telling herself that tomorrow might be the breakthrough God had promised. But tomorrow always looked exactly like yesterday. 1 year passed. The savings she had spent 7 years building slowly disappeared. She let go of her receptionist because she could no longer afford to pay her salary. She canceled unnecessary expenses, delayed replacing broken office equipment, and learned to stretch every naira just to keep the business alive. The hardest part wasn't the financial pressure. It was watching everyone else move forward. Former colleagues announced promotions. University classmates expanded their businesses. People she once mentored were now celebrating successes she had prayed for herself. She was genuinely happy for them. But deep inside, one question kept returning. If God had led her here, why did it feel like every door remained closed? Yet despite the disappointment, Amara never forgot Pastor Elias's words. The next door that comes before you will change your life. Do not open it yourself. So she waited. She prayed and believed. She just didn't realize that the longer heaven remained silent, the easier it would become to mistake the wrong opportunity for the right answer. The longer Amara waited, the more convincing doubt became. It started with small conversations. Friends would ask how the business was going, and she would smile before quietly changing the subject. Family members encouraged her to hang in there, but their encouragement slowly began to sound like sympathy. Even people from church started saying things like, maybe God has something different in mind. Among them was her closest friend, Vivian. Vivian had walked with Amara through every stage of her journey. They prayed together in university, celebrated each other's victories, and supported one another through difficult seasons. But while Amara continued believing that God would eventually open the right door, Vivian had become convinced that success belonged to people who created opportunities instead of waiting for them. One afternoon, Vivian invited Amara to lunch. After listening to another story about a canceled contract, she finally leaned forward and said what she had been thinking for months. "Amara, can I be honest with you?" "Of course." "I think you're waiting for something that has already passed." Amara frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean you've built your entire future around one prophecy. Maybe God was telling you to be wise, not to wait forever. Faith doesn't mean standing still while life passes you by." Amara remained silent. Vivian continued. "Look at everything you've done. You resigned from a stable job. You started your business. You've prayed. You've worked hard. Maybe God is waiting for you to stop expecting miracles and start taking bigger opportunities." The words lingered in Amara's mind long after lunch ended. They sounded reasonable. Maybe too reasonable. A week later, Vivian called again. "I want you to meet someone." "Who?" "His name is Victor Adeyemi." "The businessman?" "The same one." Amara had heard of him. Victor was one of the country's fastest rising entrepreneurs. His companies were expanding across Africa. Business magazines praised his leadership, and young entrepreneurs admired the empire he had built in less than a decade. "I've done some consulting work for one of his companies," Vivian explained. "They're looking for someone to lead their finance department. I told them about you." Amara hesitated. "I'm not looking for a job." Vivian smiled. "Don't think of it as a job. Think of it as the opportunity you've been praying for." Those words immediately reminded Amara of Pastor Elias's prophecy. "The next door that comes before you will change your life." For a brief moment, she wondered, could this be that door? The following evening, Amara met Vivian at one of Victor Adeyemi's corporate offices. The building reflected everything she had once imagined success would look like. Modern architecture, polished marble floors, employees moving with confidence, and walls covered with awards recognizing the company's rapid growth. A few minutes later, Victor walked into the boardroom. He wasn't loud or intimidating. He greeted Amara warmly, thanked her for coming, and spent the next hour asking about her career, her business, and her views on financial integrity. By the end of the conversation, he smiled. "I've spoken to several people about you." Amara looked surprised. "You have?" They all said the same thing. "If Amara Nwosu signs a financial statement, you don't need to check it twice." She smiled politely. "That's kind of them." "No," Victor replied. "It's rare." He leaned back in his chair. "I've spent months looking for someone I can trust with the financial future of this company." Then he got straight to the point. "I'd like you to become the chief financial officer of Adeyemi Global." For a moment, Amara couldn't speak. Victor continued. "You'll oversee every financial operation across our companies. The salary is 3 times what you're making now, plus performance bonuses, company shares, and complete freedom to build the finance department the way you believe it should be run." It sounded almost too good to be true. Seeing the hesitation on her face, Victor smiled. "You don't have to answer today. I never ask people to make important decisions under pressure." As Amara stood to leave, Victor walked her to the door. Just before she stepped outside, he said something that made her stop. "Maybe this is the door you've been praying for." The words hit her like lightning. She froze. It was almost identical to what Pastor Elias had said over a year earlier. The drive home was unusually quiet. For the first time since opening her accounting firm, Amara felt genuine hope. Maybe all the waiting had finally come to an end. Maybe God hadn't forgotten her after all. That night, she opened her notebook and reread the prophecy. "The next door that comes before you will change your life. Do not open it yourself." She closed the notebook and whispered a short prayer, Lord, if this opportunity is from you, give me peace. She waited, but heaven remained silent. After several days of prayer and uncertainty, Amara finally made her decision. She called Victor. I'll accept the position. Victor smiled. I promise you, Amara, you won't regret it. Neither of them knew that the decision she believed would rescue her future had already begun to destroy it. Amara's first few months at Adeyemi Global felt like a dream. For the first time in her career, she was valued for her ability instead of overlooked because of it. Victor kept every promise he had made. He trusted her decisions, listened to her advice, and publicly credited her whenever the company achieved another milestone. Under her leadership, the finance department became more efficient than ever, and investors praised the company's transparency and rapid growth. As the business expanded, so did Amara's life. She paid off every debt her family owed. She bought her mother the house she had always dreamed of owning. She replaced her aging car with a new SUV. Even her struggling accounting firm finally closed without leaving her buried in debt. People at church couldn't stop talking about her testimony. God has finally remembered you, one woman said after a Sunday service. Another smiled and added, your waiting season is over. For the first time in years, Amara believed they were right. Then one afternoon, Victor walked into her office carrying a thin blue file. I need your help with something, he said. Amara looked up from her computer. What is it? Victor placed the file on her desk. It's a small accounting adjustment before next week's audit. She opened the documents and immediately noticed that several transactions had been recorded under different reporting dates. She frowned. These dates don't match the original records. Victor nodded calmly. I know. It's only temporary. We'll move everything back after the audit. Amara looked at him. Why not leave them as they are? Victor smiled. Because timing matters. The company is negotiating with international investors. I need this quarter's reports to reflect our strongest financial position. Seeing the concern on her face, he continued. Nothing is being stolen. No money is missing. We're simply presenting the business in the best possible light. Amara studied the documents again. Technically, the money existed. The transactions were real. It was only the reporting period that had changed. Victor leaned forward. Every large company does this. If we don't secure these investors, hundreds of expansion plans disappear. He paused. I hired you because I trust your judgment. I hope you trust mine too. The room fell silent. Amara thought about Pastor Elias's warning. Do not open it yourself. Then she looked at the reports one last time. It wasn't fraud. At least, that's what she convinced herself. Slowly, she signed the documents. Victor smiled, picked up the file, and thanked her before leaving the office. Amara watched the door close behind him. It was only one signature, one small compromise, one decision she believed would never matter. She couldn't have been more wrong. The first adjustment came and went without consequences. The audit was completed successfully. Investors remained confident, and Adeyemi Global announced another record-breaking quarter. Victor personally thanked Amara for helping the company secure its next phase of expansion. For a while, she convinced herself she had worried over nothing. Then another request came. This time, Victor asked her to move funds between two subsidiary accounts before the quarterly financial statements were released. It'll only be for a few days, he assured her. Once the reports are published, everything goes back to normal. Amara hesitated. This doesn't accurately reflect our cash position. Victor nodded. I know. But perception matters in business. Investors don't just buy numbers, they buy confidence. She wanted to object. Instead, she signed. Over the following months, the requests became more frequent. A payment approved before the paperwork was complete. A transfer processed without the usual documentation. A consulting company paid before its contract reached her desk. Each time she questioned Victor, he had an answer. Legal will handle it. The documents are still being processed. You're worrying too much. And every time she signed, nothing bad happened. In fact, the company only became more successful. New offices opened across West Africa. International investors poured in. Business magazines called Victor one of the country's most visionary entrepreneurs. People praised Amara for helping build one of Africa's fastest-growing companies. At church, she became a testimony. She sponsored youth programs, funded missionary projects, and quietly paid school fees for children whose parents couldn't afford an education. Whenever she stood to give thanks during testimony service, the congregation erupted into applause. They saw God's blessing. They couldn't see the compromises hidden beneath it. Then one afternoon, Victor walked into her office carrying a thick black folder. Unlike the previous files, this one made Amara uncomfortable the moment she opened it. Inside were payment approvals for 3 consulting companies she had never heard of. There were invoices, transfer instructions, payment schedules, but something was missing. There are no service contracts, she said. Victor remained calm. They're confidential. She turned another page. There are no office addresses either. They operate internationally. Amara looked up. I can't verify any of these companies. Victor's smile faded for the first time. He slowly sat across from her. Amara, we've worked together for almost 2 years. Have I ever given you a reason not to trust me? She didn't answer. He leaned forward. This expansion depends on these payments. If they aren't processed today, we lose a major international partnership. He paused before delivering the sentence that broke down her last defense. Hundreds of families are depending on this company. Don't let paperwork stop something that could change their lives. Amara stared at the file. Everything inside her told her not to sign, but she remembered how every previous compromise had worked out. Nothing had happened. No investigation, no audit issues, no missing money, just growth. Slowly, she reached for her pen. This time, she didn't need convincing. She signed. And with that signature, Amara crossed a line she didn't even realize she had been approaching. 3 months later, Amara's world came crashing down. She had just arrived at the office when shouting erupted outside the finance department. Employees rushed into the hallways. Phones rang endlessly. People whispered in panic. Before anyone could make sense of the confusion, dozens of investigators stormed the building. Nobody leaves the premises! This is an official investigation! The entire office froze. Amara stepped out of her office just as several officers walked past her carrying search warrants. She approached one of them. Excuse me. What's happening? The officer looked directly at her. Are you Amara Nwosu? Yes. We have a warrant to investigate Adeyemi Global for financial fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. That can't be right. She immediately reached for her phone and called Victor. No answer. She called again. His phone was switched off. Within minutes, senior executives gathered in the boardroom. Nobody knew where Victor was. His assistant hadn't seen him. His driver said he never arrived home the previous night. His private residence was empty. Then the worst news arrived. Victor Adeyemi had disappeared. Investigators spent the entire day removing computers, financial records, and confidential files from the building. Every department was questioned. Every executive was interviewed. Late that afternoon, one of the investigators entered the finance department carrying several thick files. He opened the first one. These are payments made to shell companies. He opened another. These are false financial statements. Then another. These are offshore transfers. Finally, he placed a stack of approval forms on the table. Every single one carried the same signature, Amara Nwosu. Her hands began to shake. I was following instructions. The lead investigator closed the file. Perhaps, But your signature made those instructions legal. At that moment, Amara finally understood. Every small compromise, every adjustment, every document she had signed believing it was temporary, had been carefully leading to this moment. Victor hadn't needed her intelligence. He had needed her reputation, because everyone trusted Amara Nwosu, and that trust had become the perfect cover for one of the biggest financial crimes in the country's history. As investigators escorted her out of the building, reporters were already gathering outside. Camera flashes lit up the entrance. Microphones were pushed toward her face. Did you help Victor Adeyemi steal the money? Were you involved from the beginning? Where is Victor? She couldn't answer. She simply lowered her head as she was led into the waiting vehicle. For the first time since Pastor Elias had spoken to her years earlier, his words echoed through her mind with terrifying clarity. The next door that comes before you will change your life, but do not open it yourself. By nightfall, Amara's face was everywhere. Television stations interrupted their regular programming to cover the scandal. News websites published her photograph beside Victor's. Social media exploded with opinions from people who had never met her, but were convinced they knew the whole story. The woman once praised for her integrity was now being called the mastermind behind one of the country's biggest financial crimes. Within days, every account connected to Adeyemi Global was frozen. Professional bodies suspended her accounting license. Her bank accounts were locked. The house she had bought for her mother was placed under investigation, while authorities traced the source of every major purchase she had made since joining Victor's company. Everything she had built disappeared almost overnight. The pain didn't stop there. People she considered friends stopped answering her calls. Church members who once celebrated her testimonies avoided her after Sunday service. Some believed she was innocent. Most simply didn't want to be associated with her. Then came the hardest conversation of her life. Her fiancé, Daniel, asked to meet her. The moment she saw his expression, she knew something was wrong. He reached into his pocket, removed the engagement ring she had given him months earlier, and placed it gently on the table. My family doesn't want us to continue. Amara stared at the ring. You think I did it? Daniel lowered his eyes. I honestly don't know what to believe anymore. She felt her heart break. You know me. I thought I did. The silence between them lasted several seconds. Finally, Daniel stood. I'm sorry. Without another word, he walked away. Amara remained seated long after he had disappeared. She wasn't thinking about the investigation. She wasn't thinking about prison. She was thinking about how quickly an entire life could fall apart. A few weeks later, the trial began. For months, prosecutors presented document after document, every questionable transaction, every false report, every payment to shell companies, every single one carried Amara's signature. Her lawyers argued that Victor had manipulated her trust and hidden the true nature of the transactions. The court acknowledged that she hadn't personally stolen the money, but it also ruled that, as chief financial officer, she had a legal duty to verify every document she approved. Her negligence had made the fraud possible. The verdict was short: guilty. As officers escorted her from the courtroom, reporters shouted questions from every direction. Amara never looked up. She simply closed her eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, she stopped asking why God had allowed it. Instead, she wondered if he had tried to stop it all along. Prison changed Amara in ways success never could. The first few weeks were the hardest. Stripped of her title, her career, and everything she had spent years building, she was left with nothing except time. Time to think. Time to remember. Time to replay every decision that had brought her there. At first, she blamed Victor. Then she blamed Vivian. Then she blamed the investigators. Eventually, she blamed God. One evening, while organizing the few personal belongings she had been allowed to keep, she found an old notebook tucked inside her Bible. It was the same notebook she had carried to the revival service years earlier. Curious, She opened it. There, written in her own handwriting, were the words Pastor Elias had spoken over her life. "The next door that comes before you will change your life. But do not open it yourself. Wait for the Lord to open it." Amara stared at the page for what felt like hours. For the first time since her arrest, she stopped thinking about Victor. Instead, she thought about every closed door before she met him. The canceled contracts, the investors who disappeared, the rejected loan applications, the clients who chose someone else. For years, she had called them disappointments. Now she saw them differently. Those weren't doors God had closed to punish her. They were doors He had closed to protect her. Tears rolled down her face as the truth finally settled in. God had never abandoned her. She had simply grown tired of waiting. That night, Amara knelt beside her prison bed. She didn't pray for her sentence to be reduced. She didn't ask God to restore her reputation. She only whispered, "Father, you were trying to protect me, and I mistook your protection for rejection. I'm sorry." From that day forward, something inside her changed. She began reading her Bible every morning. She joined the prison fellowship. She started helping inmates understand basic financial literacy so they could rebuild their lives after release. For the first time in years, Amara wasn't chasing success. She was chasing God. Ironically, that was the freedom she had been searching for all along. 3 years later, Amara walked out of prison carrying everything she owned in a single small bag. There were no cameras waiting outside, no reporters, no friends. Only one person stood at the gate, her mother. The moment they saw each other, neither of them spoke. They simply embraced and cried. "I thought I lost you," her mother whispered. "You never did," Amara replied. Starting over wasn't easy. No accounting firm wanted to hire a woman whose conviction had once made national headlines. Every interview ended the same way. They admired her qualifications, but they couldn't risk their reputation. For the first time since graduating from university, Amara couldn't find work. Instead of giving up, she chose to serve. She volunteered at her local church, helping widows organize their finances, teaching young entrepreneurs how to manage money honestly, and warning anyone who would listen about the danger of compromising their integrity for success. She never hid her past. In fact, she began every seminar the same way. "My name is Amara Nwosu. I was once the chief financial officer of one of the fastest growing companies in the country. And I lost everything because I ignored one warning from God." People listened, not because she was successful, but because she had survived failure. Her pain gave her credibility that success never could. Months turned into years. The seminars grew larger. Churches across the country invited her to speak. Business owners sought her counsel before signing major contracts. Young accountants came to learn from someone who understood both success and failure. One afternoon, after finishing a leadership seminar, a young entrepreneur named David approached her. "I've always wanted to thank you," he said. Amara smiled. "For what?" "A few years ago, I was offered the biggest contract of my life. It promised quick money, but something didn't feel right." He laughed softly. "I remembered your story. So I walked away." "What happened?" 6 months later, the company was exposed for fraud. He shook his head in disbelief. "If I had signed that deal, I would have lost everything." Amara smiled. For the first time, she understood why God had allowed her story to continue. It wasn't so she could reclaim her old life. It was so someone else wouldn't lose theirs. A few years later, David stood before thousands of people after receiving the National Young Entrepreneur of the Year award. During his acceptance speech, he paused before saying, "The woman who taught me integrity once lost everything because she compromised her own. Her story became the foundation of my success." The cameras turned toward the audience. There sat Amara. She wasn't on the stage. She wasn't receiving an award. She wasn't seeking recognition. She simply smiled through tears. At that moment, she finally understood. God's greatest purpose had never been to make her successful. It had always been to make her faithful. Sometimes we spend years praying for God to open a door, never realizing His love is the very thing keeping it closed. Not every opportunity is an answer to prayer. Some are tests, and wisdom is learning to trust God's timing, even when His silence is the only answer we hear.